I should have never rented that apartment in Bangkok, but when you're young and chasing new experiences, you think warnings are just superstition. The building was cheap, the location was perfect, and the landlord seemed almost too eager to hand me the keys. I remember the first night I walked through that hallway, the flickering fluorescent light, the smell of stale incense mixed with mildew, and the unsettling silence that swallowed every footstep. I told myself it was just an old building, that the creaks and groans were natural. But deep down, I felt it. Something was waiting for me in that place, something that wanted me there, or wanted me gone. It started with the sound of water. I lived on the 4th floor, but every night, without fail, I would hear dripping echoing through the walls. Not the light, random kind of dripping from a leaky faucet. It was slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. It would begin around midnight and continue until dawn, as if something upstairs was bleeding water into the pipes. The strange part was, the unit above mine had been sealed off for years. The landlord told me no one lived there anymore, that the previous tenant had left suddenly and never came back for their belongings. I asked why, but he avoided my eyes and muttered something about foreigners not understanding old stories. That only made me more curious, and more uneasy. During the day, the building seemed normal. People went about their lives, the street vendors outside filled the air with the scent of grilled meat and spices, and children ran up and down the stairs. But at night, the atmosphere changed. The hallway felt narrower, the air grew damp, and the elevator refused to work after midnight. I once got stuck in it for a full minute, the lights flickering before finally releasing me on the wrong floor. When the doors opened, I swear I saw someone standing at the far end of the corridor, half hidden in the shadows. Their outline was faint, but their head was tilted unnaturally to the side, like their neck couldn't support the weight. I blinked, and they were gone, but the air remained heavy with the smell of stagnant water. I told myself I was imagining things, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But then the dreams began. Every night I saw the same apartment, the sealed one above mine. I would dream of standing in its doorway, the lock already broken, the door slowly swinging open. Inside, it was dark, but I could hear the sound of water dripping onto the floor. The moment I stepped inside, my feet would splash into a shallow pool of water, and I would see pale hands reaching up from beneath the surface, clawing toward my legs. I always woke up before they could pull me under, but my sheets were damp with sweat, and sometimes, I swore I smelled that same musty scent of mildew in my room. One night, after waking from another one of those dreams, I heard something scratching above me. At first it was faint, like a rat trapped in the ceiling. But it grew louder, heavier, until it sounded like fingernails dragging across the floorboards of the room above. I lay frozen in my bed, listening, when suddenly the sound stopped, and water began dripping again. Except this time, it wasn't coming from inside the walls. I looked toward the corner of my room, and there it was, a dark patch slowly spreading across the ceiling, wet droplets forming before splattering onto the floor. The ceiling was leaking. My first thought was that maybe a pipe had burst, so I grabbed a bucket and placed it underneath. But as the water collected, I noticed it wasn't clear. It was cloudy, with a faint reddish tint, and it smelled wrong. Metallic, like rust, but sharper. The kind of smell you can't mistake once you've encountered it. It smelled like blood diluted with water. The next morning I went to the landlord and told him what happened. He listened quietly, his expression tense, then shook his head. He said the upstairs unit had no running water, no electricity, nothing that could cause a leak. When I pressed him, he leaned closer and whispered something that made my stomach turn. He said I should avoid looking at the ceiling at night, because if I stared too long, it might start staring back. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but his eyes never changed. He meant it. He said that some places remember what happened inside them, and that the upstairs apartment was one of them. Of course, I didn't listen. Curiosity always wins. That night, I kept staring at the damp patch on my ceiling. The dripping had already begun, steady and loud, echoing in the silence of my room. I told myself it was just water, just some old building problem. But then the drops began to fall slower, as if something was blocking them, and I saw the shadow of a hand pressing against the ceiling, the faint outline of fingers stretching unnaturally wide. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The hand slowly pulled back, and the dripping stopped altogether. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring, waiting, terrified that it would return. The following day, I decided to leave. I told myself I would pack up and find another place, even if it was more expensive. But when I got back from work, I found something slipped under my door. It was a photograph, water-stained and warped, but still clear enough to see. It showed a woman standing in the hallway of my building. Her hair hung long and wet over her face, her clothes clung to her body as though she had been soaked, and her head tilted to one side, the same way I had seen that shadow in the hallway. What chilled me the most was that behind her, blurred but visible, was my own door. The picture had been taken right outside my apartment. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the lights on, clutching the photo in my shaking hands. Around 3 a.m., the dripping began again, louder than before, echoing like it was inside my skull. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. Then came the scratching, the dragging sound of fingernails above me, circling, moving slowly toward the corner. I forced myself to look up, and that was when I saw it. A crack had formed in the ceiling, thin but spreading, and from it seeped not water, but strands of long black hair dangling down, swaying gently as if moved by an unseen current. The strands of hair dangled lower, wet and glistening, until one brushed against the top of my wardrobe. My entire body tensed. I could hear it now, a faint dripping that wasn't falling to the floor anymore but sliding down each strand of hair, making a soft patter against the wood. My instinct screamed to run, but I couldn't move. It felt like my muscles had locked up, like the air in the room had thickened into glue. Then I heard something worse than the dripping, breathing. It was faint, slow, and ragged, as though whoever was above me had been holding their breath for hours and finally exhaled. I forced my eyes away from the ceiling, but in the corner of my vision, I swore I saw the hair twisting, curling toward me as if alive. When morning came, I packed my bag. I told myself I would hand the keys back, no matter what excuse the landlord gave. But when I stepped into the hallway, the entire fourth floor felt deserted. Usually, I'd hear at least one door slam or a radio playing, but that day it was silent. Too silent. The air smelled like mold, stronger than before, and I realized the floorboards under my feet felt damp. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Nothing. I pressed it again. Still nothing. Finally, I decided to take the stairs. But as I approached the stairwell, I stopped cold. There was water pooled on the first step, so much that it looked like someone had dumped a bucket down the stairs. I peered over the railing, and my stomach flipped. Every flight of stairs below me was covered in water, shallow but steady, like the entire building was slowly flooding from within. Yet I couldn't hear any dripping. Just silence. I turned back to head to my room, and that was when I saw her. A woman standing at the far end of the hallway, right in front of the sealed apartment. Her hair was long and wet, sticking to her pale skin. Her head tilted to the side at that unnatural angle, and her arms hung limply by her sides. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stood there, as if she had been waiting for me all along. My throat went dry. I wanted to run, but she raised her arms slowly, and the sound that followed made me almost collapse. Her fingernail dragged across the door of the sealed apartment, producing the same scratching noise I had heard above me at night. I stumbled backward, my heartbeat slamming in my chest. I blinked once, and she was gone. The hallway was empty again. But the door to the sealed apartment was now slightly ajar. I don't remember unlocking my own door, but somehow I was back inside, gasping for breath, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen her. The rest of the day I stayed locked in, blinds drawn, lights on. I didn't dare step outside. Every time I thought about leaving, I imagined that open door upstairs, imagined her standing just beyond it, dripping water onto the floor, waiting for me. That night, I made the mistake of falling asleep with the lights on. The dreams returned, stronger than ever. This time, I wasn't just standing outside the sealed apartment. I was inside. The room was filled ankle-deep with water, dark and cold. The air was heavy with the stench of rot, and in the corner, I could see her. Kneeling in the water, her back turned to me, hair floating around her like seaweed. She was whispering something, but I couldn't understand the words. I took one step closer, and she stopped whispering. Slowly, she began to rise. As she turned, I saw her face for the first time. Her eyes were gone, just hollow sockets streaming with water, and her mouth opened wider than humanly possible. A torrent of water poured out, rushing toward me, pulling me under. I woke up choking, gasping, and when I sat up in bed, I realized my floor was wet again. A puddle had formed beneath my mattress. But this time, there were wet footprints leading from the corner of my room straight to my bed. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I confronted the landlord, slamming the keys onto his desk. He looked at me with that same tired, haunted expression and said he warned me. He told me the story of the woman upstairs. Years ago, she had lived in that very apartment with her husband. Their relationship was toxic, filled with fights that the neighbors often overheard. One night, the screaming stopped. The next morning, the husband was gone. No one ever saw him again. But the wife remained inside, locked away. The neighbors complained of water leaking down the walls, the same smell of mildew and blood. When the landlord finally forced open the door weeks later, they found her floating in a bathtub filled to the brim. No one knew if it was an accident, a suicide, or something worse. The authorities sealed the apartment, but strange things kept happening. Tenants reported dripping water, scratches, whispers in the night. Some moved away after only days. Others claimed to see her wandering the hallways, leaving wet footprints behind. He leaned in and said something that made me freeze. He told me the reason the apartment wasn't demolished, the reason it was left sealed, was because no matter how many times they locked it, it always opened again on its own. And anyone who stayed directly beneath it, like me, was bound to draw her attention. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why he hadn't told me this before. But then I remembered his words from earlier, about not staring at the ceiling, about not asking too many questions. Maybe he thought I wouldn't believe him. Maybe he thought I would leave on my own. Either way, I wasn't going to spend another night there. I left his office, went back to my room, and grabbed my bag. But as I stepped into the hallway, my heart sank. The air was heavy again, thick with humidity, and the smell of mildew was unbearable. The door to the sealed apartment upstairs wasn't just ajar anymore. It was wide open. The door upstairs was wide open, yawning into darkness like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. My legs felt like stone, but my eyes wouldn't look away. I told myself to keep walking, to get out of that building for good, but something in the silence pulled at me. It wasn't just the sight of the open door, it was the sound. For the first time in nights, there was no dripping. No scratching. Only silence so deep it felt like pressure against my ears. I forced myself down the hallway, my bag clutched in my hand, but when I reached the stairwell, I froze again. The water was gone. The steps were bone dry, like they had never been wet at all. The smell was gone too. No mildew, no rot. Just nothing. That was somehow worse. And then I heard it. A faint splash from above. My chest tightened. Slowly, I looked up the stairwell. On the 5th floor landing, just past the railing, I saw it, water dripping steadily, spreading across the tiles, running down toward me. The sound echoed down the shaft, growing louder, faster. Something inside me snapped. I ran, bolting down the stairs, my shoes slapping against the damp tiles, water spraying in every direction. The air grew colder with every step, and by the time I reached the 2nd floor, I could hear footsteps splashing behind me, too heavy, too close. They weren't mine. I didn't dare look back. I burst through the lobby doors and out into the humid Bangkok night, gasping for air like I'd been drowning. I didn't go back. I checked into a cheap hostel across the city and told myself I'd return in the morning with a moving truck, grab my things, and never look back. But that night, in the hostel, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt dampness spreading beneath me. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of dripping again. Not outside, not in the bathroom. Right above me. I stared at the ceiling, and my heart nearly stopped. A dark wet patch was spreading across the plaster. I scrambled out of bed, but as I turned toward the door, something caught my ankle. A strand of wet black hair was wrapped around me, tightening, dragging me backward. I clawed at it, tearing it loose, stumbling into the hallway. No one else stirred. No one heard me. I left everything in that hostel room and spent the rest of the night walking the streets, too afraid to close my eyes. The next morning, I went back to my old apartment building with one goal: grab my things and leave Thailand entirely. When I arrived, the street outside was eerily empty, no vendors, no noise. The building looked older somehow, the paint peeling, windows dark. I stepped inside, and the lobby reeked of mold. The floor was slick with moisture, and the elevator doors stood open, filled with ankle-deep water. I didn't wait. I took the stairs, rushing up to the 4th floor. But when I reached my hallway, my door was gone. In its place was the door of the sealed apartment, the one upstairs, the one that had been wide open. And it was waiting for me. My bag slipped from my hand. The smell hit me first: rot, mildew, and something unmistakably sweet and metallic. Water seeped from beneath the door, spreading across the floor, soaking into my shoes. The silence was unbearable. I told myself to turn back, to run, but before I could move, the door creaked open. Inside, it was exactly like my dreams. The floor was covered in shallow, dark water, rippling even though the air was still. The wallpaper peeled from the walls in damp strips, and the ceiling sagged with moisture. At the far end of the room, half submerged in the shadows, she stood. Her hair floated around her face, her head tilted, water dripping steadily from her hollow eyes. She didn't move at first. She just stared, or rather, I felt her stare, like weight pressing against my chest. Then she stepped forward. The water rippled with each movement, yet her feet didn't make a sound. I stumbled back, but the door behind me slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. The only sound was water, dripping, splashing, filling the silence. She moved closer, her mouth opening slowly, too wide, until water began to pour out, rushing toward me, rising fast. I tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The water climbed to my knees, then my waist, icy cold, pulling me under. I screamed, but the sound died in my throat. The last thing I saw before the water closed over my head was her face inches from mine, empty sockets leaking endless streams that became the flood itself. When I woke, I was lying outside on the street. It was morning, the vendors were back, and the building looked normal again. My clothes were soaked, my skin clammy, but no one seemed to notice. I tried to explain what happened, but the words never came out right. People just looked at me like I was insane. I never went back. I left Thailand the very next day, leaving everything behind. But here's the part one can't explain. Even now, back in my own country, I still hear it. Every night around midnight, the dripping begins. Sometimes it's faint, sometimes louder, but it's always there. And worse. I've started finding wet footprints on my floor. I know she followed me. And if you've ever stayed in one of those old, water-stained apartments in Thailand, maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you've heard the dripping. Maybe you've felt that silence pressing against you. If you have, then you'll understand why I'll never close my eyes in the dark again. Because she's still here. Waiting. Watching. And every night, the water rises a little higher.